The courtroom door clicked shut behind me, sealing the silence that followed. Every eye in the gallery turned not toward the defendant's box where my brother Mark sat in a wrinkled suit, but toward me, the sister who had refused to stand beside him. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the wooden benches, and I could feel my mother's stare burning into the back of my neck. But I didn't turn around. I had learned in another lifetime that turning around only invited more pain. The judge's gavel hadn't fallen yet, but the weight of it already hung in the air like a held breath. Mark's lawyer shuffled papers nervously, the rustling sound sharp in the expectant quiet. My brother's head was bowed, his shoulders hunched in a posture I'd seen him practice in the mirror once, the repentant son, the misunderstood golden boy. It was a performance I'd watched unfold 1,000 times before, but this time I wasn't part of his audience. This time I was the one who had walked away. The thing about dying is that it clarifies everything. The mistakes become obvious, the patterns reveal themselves, the lies stop working. I had died at 28 years old in a hospital room that smelled of bleach and failure. The machines beside my bed had beat their steady rhythm while my family argued in the hallway about who would take my apartment, who would get my savings account, who would have to deal with my student loan debt. No one mentioned my name. No one asked if I was comfortable or afraid, or if I wanted anyone to hold my hand. Mark had been there, though, standing in the doorway with his phone out, texting someone, probably his girlfriend, probably complaining about how inconvenient this all was for him. My mother had walked in once, briefly. She'd looked at me with the same expression she always wore when she looked at me. Vague disappointment mixed with obligation. "Jennifer," she'd said, using my full name, the way she only did when she was checking a box on some mental list. "The doctors say it won't be much longer. Is there anything you need to tell us? Any accounts we should know about? Any money set aside?" Even then, dying, I had felt the old instinct rise up in me. The need to make things easier for them, to apologise for being sick, to promise I'd handle my own funeral expenses somehow. But my throat had been too raw, my voice too weak, and by the time I gathered enough breath to speak, she was already gone. Mark had been the one to find me the next morning. The machines had gone quiet sometime in the night. He'd stood there for a full minute, I learned later from a nurse, just staring at my body, not crying, not calling for help, just staring. Then he'd checked his watch, made a phone call, and left. At my funeral, he'd cried beautifully, big, photogenic tears that looked perfect in the photos my aunt posted on social media. He'd given a speech about what a wonderful sister I'd been, how I'd always supported him, how I'd always put family first. People had hugged him, told him how strong he was, how mature. What a good brother. No one mentioned that I'd paid his rent for 3 years. No one talked about how I'd taken the blame when he'd crashed our father's car at 17. No one remembered that I dropped out of college to work full-time so he could finish his degree. The story they told at my funeral was about Mark's grief, Mark's loss, Mark's strength in the face of tragedy. I'd listened to it all from somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold and final, and I'd felt, for the first time, something sharper than sadness, something that tasted like clarity. When I opened my eyes again, I was 16 years old, lying in my childhood bedroom with the morning sun slanting through the blinds in dusty gold stripes. The alarm clock on my nightstand read 6:47 a.m, and I could hear my mother downstairs making breakfast, the familiar clatter of pans and running water. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed it all. The hospital, the funeral, the crushing weight of a life spent erasing myself for people who never even learned my middle name. But then I moved, and I felt it. The knowledge, the memory, everything that had happened and everything that would happen if I let it. It sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and permanent. I got up slowly. My body felt different, younger, stronger, unmarked by the years of exhaustion that had carved themselves into my bones. In the mirror above my dresser, my face looked back at me softer and rounder than I remembered, still holding the last traces of childhood. My hair was longer, my eyes were brighter, but behind them I could see myself, the woman who had died alone, unmissed, used up. Downstairs, my mother called my name. "Jennifer! Mark needs a ride to school. Your father already left." The old me would have rushed down immediately, would have grabbed the car keys without question, would have skipped breakfast to make sure Mark got to school on time, even though he was perfectly capable of taking the bus, even though he'd probably want to stop for coffee and make me late to my own classes. Instead, I walked to my closet, took my time getting dressed, brushed my hair slowly, methodically, watching my reflection with the strange sense that I was seeing myself for the first time. When I finally went downstairs, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table with his backpack at his feet, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up when I entered. He never did. I was a convenience to him, not a person, a resource to be used. "You're late," my mother said, not looking at me. She was packing Mark's lunch, the good lunch, with the name-brand snacks and the sandwich on fresh bread. My lunch, if I got one at all, would be whatever was left over. "Mark's going to be late because of you." In my old life, I would have apologised, would have grabbed the keys and rushed out the door, would have driven too fast and bought Mark coffee with my own money and somehow made it work. Instead, I poured myself a glass of orange juice, sat down at the table, took a slow sip. "I'm not driving him," I said quietly. The kitchen went still. My mother's hand stopped moving. Mark's head snapped up from his phone, his expression shifting from boredom to annoyance in an instant. "What do you mean you're not driving him?" My mother's voice had that edge in it, the one that used to make me scramble to fix whatever I'd done wrong. "I have my own classes. He can take the bus." Mark stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. "Are you serious right now? Mum, tell her she has to take me. The bus takes forever and I have a test first period." I looked at him, really looked at him. At 17, he was already learning the shape of the man he'd become. The one who'd let me die alone, the one who'd cry at my funeral while checking his phone. He had our father's sharp jaw and our mother's dark eyes, and he'd learned early that those features, combined with charm and strategic helplessness, could get him almost anything he wanted. "You should have thought about that earlier," I said. "Maybe leave on time for the bus." His face flushed red. "What is your problem?" I finished my orange juice, set the glass down carefully in the sink. "No problem. I just have my own life to think about." I could feel my mother's shock radiating across the kitchen, but I didn't turn to look at her. I simply picked up my backpack and walked out the front door, leaving Mark standing there with his mouth open and his test unstudied for and his assumption of my servitude finally, beautifully, cracked. The days that followed had a strange quality to them, like watching a movie I'd already seen, but with the sound turned down. I knew what was coming. I knew the patterns, the crises, the moments where I was supposed to step in and save Max from the consequences of his own choices. A week after I'd refused to drive him, he got detention for being late. He came home furious, stormed into my room without knocking, and demanded to know why I was being such a bitch lately. The old me would have flinched, would have apologised, would have somehow made it my fault. Instead, I'd looked up from my homework and said very calmly, "Get out of my room." "Mum said you have to—" "I don't have to do anything. Get out." He'd stood there for a moment, visibly struggling with the fact that I wasn't reacting the way I was supposed to. Then, he'd slammed my door hard enough to rattle the frame. I'd listened to him stomp down the hallway, listened to him complain to our mother in a loud voice clearly meant for me to hear. I'd heard her murmuring something soothing, something that probably involved making excuses for him and blaming me. But I hadn't moved. Hadn't rushed out to smooth things over. I'd simply returned to my homework, and for the first time in years, lifetimes. I'd felt something like peace. The cracks in Mark's perfect facade started small. A missed assignment here, a failed test there. Things he'd always relied on me to fix or cover for him. Our parents noticed, but they didn't connect it to my absence from his support system. They simply assumed he was going through a phase, that he'd pull it together like he always did. But Mark wasn't capable of pulling things together. He'd never had to learn. I'd always been there, running interference, cleaning up messes, taking blame. Without me, he was just a mediocre student with an inflated sense of his own importance and no actual skills to back it up. I watched it happen with a strange sense of detachment. I went to school, I did my own work, I stopped making excuses when he asked me to lie for him. I stopped lending him money I'd earned from my part-time job at the library. I stopped being available. At dinner, my parents would ask me pointed questions. Why didn't you help your brother with his essay? Why didn't you remind him about his project? Why are you being so selfish lately? I'd learned to smile and say nothing, to eat my food slowly and let their disappointment wash over me without absorbing it. They wanted me to be small and useful. I was choosing instead to be neither. 3 months after my rebirth, Mark got caught cheating on a test. Not a subtle cheat. He'd copied answers directly from the student next to him, word for word, including a deliberately incorrect answer the other student had planted as a trap. The teacher had called our parents in for a meeting. Mark had, predictably, tried to lie his way out of it. When that hadn't worked, he'd cried and said he was stressed, overwhelmed, that he'd made a mistake. Our parents had believed him, had advocated for him, had gotten him a second chance with a warning on his record. That night, Mark had come to my room again. This time, he hadn't been angry. He'd been calculating. "Hey," he'd said, leaning against my doorframe with practiced casualness. "I know we haven't been getting along lately, but I need your help with something." I'd set down the book I was reading. Waited. "There's this thing for Dad's company, like a family day event thing, and I kind of told them I'd organised this whole charity drive for my college applications, but I haven't actually done it yet, and the event is next month, and you want me to do it for you." He'd shrugged, smiling in that boyish way that usually got him out of trouble. "You're good at that kind of thing, and you're not doing anything else important right now. Come on, Jen. Family, right?" Family, the word he only used when he wanted something. "No," I'd said simply. His smile had faltered. "What?" "No, I'm not doing it. That's your lie. You can handle the consequences." "Jen, come on, don't be like this. If I don't pull this off, it's going to look really bad. Dad's boss will be there. This could affect the whole family." I picked up my book again. "Then, I guess you'd better figure something out." He'd stood there for a long moment, and I'd seen it happen. The moment he realised I wasn't going to cave. The moment his charm stopped working. His face had hardened, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold. "You're really going to let me fail? Let the whole family down? What's wrong with you?" "Nothing's wrong with me. That's the problem." He'd left without another word, and I'd gone back to my book, my hands perfectly steady on the pages. The charity drive had been a disaster, of course. Mark had thrown something together at the last minute. A bake sale with store-bought cookies he'd tried to pass off as homemade. Someone had recognised the packaging. Someone else had posted about it online. By the time my father's company family day arrived, Mark's charitable initiative was a minor internet joke. My father had been furious. Not at Mark, not really. At the situation. At the embarrassment. But mostly, somehow at me. "You could have helped him," he'd said over dinner the night after the event, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You could have prevented this." "How?" I'd asked calmly. "You know how. You're good at organising things. You could have stepped in. He's 17 years old. He can organise his own projects." He's your brother." My mother's voice had been sharp, wounded. "Family helps family. We don't let each other fail." I'd looked at both of them then, really looked. At the way they'd arranged their entire worldview around protecting Mark, excusing Mark, enabling Mark. At the way they'd never once wondered if I needed help, if I was struggling, if I was tired. "I am helping him," I'd said quietly. "I'm letting him learn." My father had slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. "Don't give me that teenage wisdom bullshit. You're being selfish, and you know it." The old me would have crumbled, would have cried, would have apologised and promised to do better. Instead, I'd stood up, cleared my plate, and walked away. Behind me, I'd heard my mother start to cry. Heard Mark say something that sounded like, "I told you, she's been acting crazy." Heard my father's angry muttering, but I'd kept walking. Up the stairs, into my room. I'd closed the door softly behind me and sat on my bed in the quiet darkness, listening to the sound of my own breathing. I hadn't saved Mark, and the sky hadn't fallen. The world hadn't ended. I was still here. The breaking point came during the spring of my senior year. I'd spent months quietly building my own life, applying to colleges Mark didn't know about, saving money he couldn't access, making friends he'd never met. I'd created a separate existence, one where I wasn't defined by my usefulness to him. But Mark's troubles had been escalating. His grades were slipping badly. He'd been suspended once for talking back to a teacher. There were rumours about him buying test answers, about him stealing from other students' lockers. Nothing proven, nothing certain, but enough smoke that even our parents were starting to worry. One evening in April, when the air smelled like rain and fresh cut grass, our parents called a family meeting. We sat in the living room, Mark sprawling on the couch, me in the armchair by the window where I could see the streetlights starting to flicker on. "We've been talking," my mother began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, "about college, about the future." I waited. "Your brother's going through a hard time right now," my father continued. "His grades aren't where they need to be for the schools he wants. And money is tight." I knew where this was going. I'd lived this conversation before, in my first life. They were going to ask me to sacrifice again. "We think it would be best," my mother said carefully, not looking at me, "if you deferred college for a year, maybe 2, just until Mark gets settled. You could work, help with expenses, maybe take some community college classes on the side." The room went very quiet. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the walls. "You could go to state school after," my father added quickly. "Once Mark's tuition is sorted out, it's not that we don't value your education. It's just that Mark needs—" "No," I said. My mother blinked. "What?" "No, I'm not deferring. I got into a good school. I'm going." Mark sat up straighter, suddenly interested. "Jen, come on, be reasonable. I don't care what you need." The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother's face went pale, my father's jaw tightened. "That's a terrible thing to say to your brother," my mother whispered. "It's the truth. He needs to figure out his own life. I'm not responsible for fixing it." "We're a family," my father said, his voice rising. "We help each other. We make sacrifices." I stood up slowly, feeling strangely calm. "I've been making sacrifices my whole life. I'm done." "If you do this," my mother said, and her voice was shaking now, "if you abandon your brother when he needs you, don't expect us to support you. Don't expect us to be there when you need help." It was a threat and a manipulation and a statement of how little they understood. They thought I needed their support. They thought I couldn't survive without them. They had never realised I'd been surviving despite them all along. "Okay," I said simply. "Okay?" Mark stood up now, his face flushed with anger. Okay. Are you fucking kidding me? After everything this family has done for you? I looked at him then, and I let him see it. The knowledge, the clarity, the absolute certainty that I was making the right choice. What has this family done for me, Mark? Tell me, specifically. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. This is your family. You've used me. That's not the same thing as family. I walked toward the stairs, but my father's voice stopped me. If you walk away now, Jennifer, you walk away for good. We won't forget this. I turned back, looked at all three of them. My parents with their conditional love, my brother with his entitled rage. Good, I said. Don't forget. Remember exactly who chose to walk away and why. Then I went to my room, closed the door, and began packing. I moved out 3 days later. A friend's mother, a woman who'd noticed the patterns long before I'd acknowledged them, helped me find a small apartment share with 2 other girls. I'd saved enough from my library job to cover first month's rent and deposits. I enrolled at the university I'd chosen, the one 2 hours away that my parents had never known I'd applied to. My mother called once, left a voicemail asking if I was done with my tantrum yet. I deleted it. Mark texted constantly for the first week. Angry messages at first, calling me selfish and heartless, then pleading ones, saying he was sorry, he didn't mean it, couldn't we just talk? Then angry again when I didn't respond. I blocked his number. My father sent an email with the subject line, disappointment. I didn't open it. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. But inside that silence, I found something I'd never had before. Space. Room to breathe. Permission to exist as myself, not as a supporting character in someone else's story. Summer passed. I worked 2 jobs, saved money, prepared for college. I made friends who knew nothing about Mark, who saw me as a whole person rather than half of a sibling set. I went to movies and stayed out late and learned what it felt like to make decisions based purely on what I wanted. And I watched from a distance as Mark's life continued to unravel. The news came in pieces, filtered through mutual acquaintances and social media posts I saw before blocking them. Mark had barely graduated high school. He'd gotten into a fight at a party and been arrested for assault, though the charges were eventually dropped. He'd been accepted to a mediocre college on probation. He'd crashed my mother's car. He'd been fired from a part-time job for stealing from the register. Each incident, I knew, was accompanied by my parents cleaning up after him, making excuses, blaming everyone else. They'd probably blamed me too, the daughter who'd abandoned them, the selfish sister. But I hadn't destroyed Mark. I'd simply stopped saving him from himself. College was everything I'd hoped. I studied psychology and literature. I joined clubs. I dated someone kind who didn't need me to be smaller to make them feel bigger. I got good grades because I had time to study, energy to focus. I discovered I was actually smart when I wasn't exhausting myself taking care of someone else. Sophomore year, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Important information about Mark." I almost deleted it, almost kept walking forward without looking back. But curiosity won. I opened it. The email was from a woman named Rebecca. She'd been Mark's girlfriend for 6 months, she said. She was writing to warn me because she'd finally gotten away from him, and she thought I should know what kind of person my brother had become. The details she shared made my stomach turn. Emotional manipulation, financial abuse. He'd taken money from her accounts. He'd isolated her from her friends. He'd told her that his family had abandoned him, that he'd been the victim his whole life, that he just needed someone to believe in him. When she'd tried to leave, he'd threatened her. When she'd finally escaped, he'd stalked her. She had a restraining order now. She wanted me to know in case he tried to use me to get to her, or in case there were other victims I could help warn. I sat in my dorm room, reading and rereading her words. feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This was who Mark had always been. I'd just been too close, too useful, too trapped to see it clearly. I wrote back to Rebecca, thanked her for telling me, shared my own experiences, not to compare pain, but to let her know she wasn't alone, that she wasn't crazy, that Mark's manipulation was real. We exchanged a few more emails. She was seeing a therapist. She was pressing charges for fraud. She was rebuilding. So was I. The call came during finals week of my junior year. I was in the library, surrounded by textbooks and highlighters and half-finished coffee, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognise. I almost ignored it. But something made me step outside, into the cold December air, and answer. "Is this Jennifer?" A man's voice, official sounding. "Yes." "This is Detective Morrison with the county police. I'm calling about your brother, Mark." My breath made clouds in the dark air. "What about him?" "He's been arrested. Multiple charges, fraud, identity theft, harassment in violation of a restraining order. We found evidence that he'd been running several scams using stolen identities. One of those identities was yours." The campus was quiet around me. Christmas lights twinkled in the windows of the buildings. Somewhere, someone laughed. "My identity?" "Credit cards in your name. Loans. He's been accessing your information for at least 2 years. We're still sorting out the extent of it, but I wanted to notify you. You'll need to file a police report. Your credit is significantly damaged." I should have felt something. Anger, betrayal, shock. But I just felt tired. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "There's one more thing," the detective said carefully. "Your mother called the station. She's asking for you to come down and make a statement on Mark's behalf. Character, witness type thing. I wanted you to know that's not necessary, and in fact, given that you're a victim, it might complicate—" "I won't be doing that," I said quietly. There was a pause. "Okay, that's your right. I'll make a note of it." After we hung up, I stood in the cold for a long time. Then I went back inside, gathered my things, and went home to my apartment. I didn't study. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in the dark and let myself feel all the things I'd been holding back. Grief, but not for Mark. Grief for the girl I'd been, the one who'd thought loving someone meant disappearing for them. Relief that I wasn't her anymore. And something else, something that felt like solid ground under my feet, like knowing which way was up. The trial happened 6 months later. I didn't attend, but I read the reports. Mark had pleaded not guilty at first, then changed it to guilty when his lawyer explained how much evidence they had. Rebecca testified. So did 3 other women. So did several business owners he'd scammed. The prosecutor read a statement I'd submitted about the identity theft, about the pattern of behaviour I'd witnessed. My mother showed up every day, sitting in the front row, crying. My father wrote letters to the judge about what a good boy Mark had been, how he'd just made mistakes, how he deserved another chance. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2. I read about it online, in a coffee shop near campus, on a sunny afternoon in spring. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the people walking past, at the cherry blossoms dropping pink petals on the sidewalk, at the world continuing to turn. My phone rang a few minutes later. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again, left increasingly frantic messages, asking how I could do this to the family, how I could let my brother go to prison, how I could be so heartless. I saved the messages just in case I ever needed evidence. Then I blocked her number, too. My father sent a letter to my apartment. I don't know how he got the address. The letter was typed, formal, cold. It said I was no longer welcome at family events, that I'd made my choice, that I'd turned my back on blood. I burned it in the kitchen sink and washed the ashes down the drain. The thing nobody tells you about cutting off toxic family is how quiet it gets. How much space opens up when you're not constantly bracing for the next crisis, the next demand, the next manipulation. How much energy you have when you're not spending it all on survival. I graduated college with honours, got into a good graduate programme for social work, started working at a non-profit that helped people escape abusive relationships. I was good at it. I understood the patterns. I could see the red flags. I knew what it looked like when someone slowly erased themselves to keep someone else happy. I started running and sleeping through the night. I dated people who respected my boundaries. I travelled. I published a paper on financial abuse in families. I made a life that was mine. 4 years after Mark's arrest, I got an email from him. He'd been released on parole. He'd found my address somehow, maybe through a mutual connection, maybe through one of his old tricks. The email was long, rambling, full of apologies and explanations. He said prison had changed him. He said he understood now what he'd done wrong. He said he wanted to make amends, to rebuild our relationship, to prove he could be better. He said he needed a place to stay while he got back on his feet, just temporarily, just until he found a job. He said I was the only family he had left, the only one who could understand. I read it once. Then I crafted a response, short and clear. Mark, I wish you well in your recovery. I am not able to be part of it. Please don't contact me again. I blocked the email address, added filters to catch any variations. Then I went about my day. He tried a few more times. Different emails, a letter, a message through an old friend. Each time I maintained the boundary. Each time it got easier. Eventually he stopped. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what happened to him. If he really changed. If he found his own way. If he's still out there blaming me for his choices, or if he finally learned to take responsibility. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. I think about the life I've built instead. The clients I've helped. The relationships I've nurtured. The person I've become. Not in reaction to trauma, but in spite of it. Because of what I learned from it. On the anniversary of my rebirth, I do something small to mark it. Sometimes I buy myself flowers. Sometimes I take myself to dinner. Sometimes I just sit in my apartment with a cup of tea and watch the sun set through my window, grateful for this second chance I somehow got. I think about the girl who died at 28, alone and unmourned. I think about how I'm living the life she never got to have. I think about how revenge would have been easy, would have felt good in the moment, sharp and satisfying. But this is better. This is peace. I didn't destroy Mark. I didn't have to. He destroyed himself the moment I stopped being the foundation he built his failures on. I just stepped aside and let the consequences finally reach him. My victory was never about watching him fall. It was about, finally, after 2 lifetimes, learning to stand up. The courtroom door clicks shut in my memory sometimes. I see it in dreams. The moment I refused to be his shield, his excuse, his saviour. The moment I chose myself instead. And every time I remember it, I feel the same thing I felt that day when the judge's gavel finally fell and I walked out into the sunlight, free. I feel like I'm breathing for the first time. Not with anger, not with bitterness, not with the need to prove anything to anyone. Just breathing, just living, just here. I didn't destroy them, I outgrew them. And in the space they used to occupy, I planted a garden. I built a home. I became someone I recognize in the mirror. Someone whole, someone real, someone who knows that the truest form of love is not sacrifice. It's boundaries. It's honesty. It's the courage to let people face the natural results of their choices, even when those results are painful. Especially then. The other day, I was working with a new client. A young woman whose brother had been stealing from her, whose parents kept asking her to forgive him, to give him another chance, to remember that family comes first. I listened to her story, saw myself in every word, and knew exactly what to tell her. "You're not responsible for saving him," I said gently. "You're only responsible for saving yourself." She cried. Then she nodded. Then she started making a plan. And I thought about how some lessons take a lifetime, or two, to learn. How some victories are so quiet they look like nothing at all. How the strongest thing you can sometimes do is simply walk away and let the door close softly behind you. My victory was never revenge. It was becoming untouchable. And every morning I wake up in my own apartment, living my own life, answering only to myself. I know that I won, not by destroying him, by refusing to destroy myself for him anymore. The sun rises, the coffee brews, the world continues. And I'm here, whole and healing and finally, beautifully free. That's all the justice I need.